She had always loved music, even though no one in her family played an instrument. Every day after school, she would sit quietly in her room with a small keyboard she had saved up to buy. Her fingers would hover over the keys, uncertain at first, but then, slowly, she would find a rhythm. She had no teacher, no lessons, just a love for the melodies that came from within her. Music was her escape from a world that sometimes felt too loud and too demanding. When she finally got the chance to join the prestigious music school, it felt like a dream come true. The school was known for producing some of the finest young musicians, and everyone who entered seemed to already know the language of music. She, on the other hand, had only ever learned by listening and practicing alone. The other students appeared confident and skilled, their hands already familiar with the instruments they played. She felt small and unsure as she walked through the wide hallways, polished floors reflecting her nervous steps. On her first day, the teachers greeted her politely, but there was one teacher whose gaze seemed to carry judgment. She was known among students for being strict, critical, and quick to find flaws. Many whispered about how harsh she could be with students she did not see as talented enough. The new student felt her eyes on her and wondered if she had made a mistake by coming here. She reminded herself that she had worked hard to get this opportunity, that her love for music was stronger than any fear. Classes began, and she struggled to keep up at first. The other students played with ease, their fingers dancing across the keys and strings. She fumbled sometimes, missing notes or hesitating at tricky passages. She could feel the teacher's eyes following her, her sharp comments like needles whenever she made a mistake. Some days, she went home feeling defeated, questioning whether she really belonged. But music was a part of her in a way nothing else was. Each evening, she would sit at her keyboard and replay the lessons from school. She worked slowly, practicing the difficult passages again and again. Even when she felt tired or frustrated, she kept going. Music was patient with her, forgiving her mistakes, allowing her to grow at her own pace. It became a secret place where she could breathe and be herself. The teacher, on the other hand, had begun to notice something unusual. She had expected the student to struggle, to show weakness like others who had failed before. But there was a certain focus in her eyes when she practiced, a quiet determination that the teacher could not ignore. She began to watch more closely, curious whether the girl's persistence would be enough to matter. The teacher had a plan in mind, a way to test her publicly, to show everyone in the class where her limitations were. She wanted to prove that talent could not be faked, and in her mind, this girl would provide the perfect example. The student, meanwhile, continued to grow in secret. She learned to listen more carefully, to notice subtle changes in tone and rhythm. She began to play pieces she had only ever dreamed of performing. Sometimes, when no one was around, she would close her eyes and let the music flow freely, feeling the notes rise and fall like waves. In those moments, nothing else mattered. She forgot the whispers, the judging eyes, even the fear of failing. Music was hers, and she cherished every moment she could spend with it. Her classmates began to notice small things. She had a quiet confidence that came through even when she stumbled. She asked questions that revealed insight, suggesting interpretations of pieces that showed understanding beyond her years. Some admired her, while others whispered about how mysterious she was, how she seemed to carry a world of her own within her. No one could guess how much effort and hours of practice had gone into her playing, how each note was the result of countless mistakes corrected and lessons learned alone. Despite her growing skill, the teacher still carried out her plan. She began assigning the student the most difficult pieces that were almost impossible to master in a short time. She made subtle remarks in front of the class, comments designed to make others doubt her ability. The whispers and laughs started to circulate, small but sharp like tiny arrows. The student felt the sting of them but refused to let them take away her love for music. She practiced longer hours, repeating each measure until it became second nature. One afternoon, the teacher pulled her aside in the practice room. "This piece is far too difficult for you," she said, her voice calm but cutting. "Perhaps you should focus on something simpler. It would save everyone some embarrassment." The student looked down, feeling the weight of the words. She could have given in, chosen an easier path, but she shook her head. "I want to try," she replied softly, almost whispering. There was no defiance in her tone, only determination. The teacher raised an eyebrow, slightly surprised at her resolve, but said nothing further. She was beginning to sense that this student was not as easy to humiliate as she had assumed. Days turned into weeks, and the student continued her secret work. She practiced late into the night, listening to recordings of great musicians and mimicking their techniques. She discovered small details that made each piece come alive, nuances that even her teacher had overlooked. She began to understand the emotions behind the notes, the way music could tell a story without a single word. Her fingers grew more confident, her timing more precise, and her connection to the music deeper. The teacher's plan, carefully constructed to expose failure, seemed to have an unexpected effect. The more pressure she applied, the more the student rose to the challenge. Each difficulty became an opportunity to grow rather than a threat. The teacher watched from the sidelines, quietly noting how the girl's talent was emerging, how her perseverance was shaping her into someone remarkable. The irony was not lost on the teacher. What was meant to humiliate was instead revealing a hidden strength. The other students began to see glimpses of it too. In the hallway, during breaks, or in quiet corners, she would play a few notes, simple at first, but then with increasing complexity. The sound would float through the air, drawing attention without her trying. People stopped to listen, their casual chatter fading as they were captivated by the music. Some were surprised that the quiet, unassuming girl could play with such feeling and skill. They began to wonder what she was capable of when given the chance. Despite the growing attention, she remained humble. She never played to impress, only to express herself and connect with the music. Her practice room became her sanctuary, a place where she could explore without judgment. She didn't boast or compare herself to others. She simply played, listened, and learned. Each note was a small victory. Each piece completed a personal triumph. She was building something inside herself that no teacher, no criticism, and no scheme could take away. As the first recital approached, tension began to rise. The teacher's scheme loomed over the student, a silent challenge she was expected to fail. Yet the student, though nervous, felt a quiet confidence. She knew how hard she had worked, how much she had learned in the shadows, and how deeply she had connected with the music. The nerves were there, but they were accompanied by a sense of readiness, a feeling that she had prepared herself for whatever would come. She was not perfect, but she was prepared to show her heart through her playing, and that was enough. The stage would soon test her in ways the practice room never had. But for now, she focused on the music itself, each practice session a rehearsal of her passion and perseverance. The teacher could plan and scheme, the whispers and doubts could swirl around her, but they could not reach the core of her determination. Music was her ally, her voice, and her secret power. She played for herself, for the joy it brought, and for the quiet thrill of proving to herself, more than anyone else, that she could rise above expectations. And in that quiet, steady work, in the solitude of her practice, the first seeds of astonishment were beginning to grow. Seeds that would one day surprise everyone, even the teacher who had tried to see her fail. The student arrived early in the music room, her bag heavy with sheet music and her heart pounding with nervous energy. She knew today's lesson would be different. The teacher had given her a particularly difficult piece, one that demanded both skill and emotion, and she could sense the challenge looming over her. The room was quiet except for the soft sound of her own breathing. She set her bag down, opened the sheet music carefully, and began to study the notes. The other students trickled in, chatting among themselves, laughing about minor mistakes or boasting about what they could play. Some threw glances at her, curious about the new girl who kept to herself but seemed determined. The teacher, standing near the piano, watched with a calculating look. She had made up her mind that today would be the moment to show everyone exactly what the student could not do. The teacher's plan was subtle. She would make sure the student faltered during practice, that her mistakes would be obvious, and that the class would see her struggle. The student sat down at the piano bench, feeling the cool keys under her fingers. She took a deep breath, letting the silence fill her mind. The teacher leaned slightly, speaking softly but loudly enough for others to hear. This piece is quite advanced. Don't be disappointed if you can't manage it. Perhaps simpler pieces are better suited for you. The words stung as intended. A few students exchanged smirks, quietly expecting the performance to falter. The student's hands hovered over the keys, hesitation creeping in, but she shook it off. She had faced harder challenges alone, and she could handle this. She began to play slowly, each note deliberate. At first, it sounded tentative, unsure. The teacher's eyes narrowed, satisfied that her plan seemed to be working. But as the student continued, something remarkable happened. Her fingers, guided by hours of secret practice, began to move more confidently. She remembered the subtle lessons she had learned by listening to recordings and practicing alone. The rhythm became steadier, the notes richer, the emotion flowing through her hands. The music started to transform from a series of notes into something alive. The teacher's expression shifted slightly, from anticipation to surprise. The student's persistence and focus were stronger than she had expected. Her strategy to make the girl stumble was failing. The student's hands moved with increasing skill and precision, shaping the difficult piece with care. Her classmates' whispers quieted, replaced by curious attention. The room that had been filled with doubt and expectation slowly changed into one of quiet amazement. After the practice session, the teacher pulled her aside. "You still have mistakes, but your persistence is remarkable," she said, almost reluctantly. The student nodded, grateful for the acknowledgement but focused more on the music itself than praise or criticism. She returned to her practice room later that afternoon, determined to perfect every measure. She repeated sections until the melody and rhythm felt natural, letting the emotion of the piece guide her fingers. Music had become a friend, offering guidance where words failed. As days passed, the teacher escalated her subtle tactics. She assigned more complex pieces, intentionally highlighting the areas where the student might struggle. In class, she would occasionally make offhand remarks about how demanding these pieces were, implying that the student might not be able to handle them. The students began to feel the tension, expecting to witness a failure. The atmosphere became a mix of anticipation and doubt, a quiet pressure that hovered in the room. Despite the growing pressure, the student continued to work diligently. She arrived early and stayed late, listening closely to the nuances of each composition, practicing until her fingers memorized every note. She learned to anticipate tricky passages, adjusting her technique to navigate the challenges seamlessly. Every stumble became a lesson, every correction a step closer to mastery. Her progress was slow but steady, almost invisible to anyone who wasn't paying close attention. Her classmates started noticing subtle changes. During breaks, some would hear fragments of her playing drifting through the hallway. Notes floated softly, delicate at first, then swelling with emotion and control. They paused, unsure how to react, some feeling admiration while others felt a little embarrassed for having doubted her. The quiet girl who had seemed fragile and unsure was revealing a talent that could not be hidden. Even those who had expected her to fail could not ignore the beauty of what they were hearing. The teacher, increasingly frustrated, tried different strategies. She would make small corrections in front of the class, emphasizing what she thought were weaknesses. She encouraged other students to demonstrate their pieces, hoping to draw attention away from the girl and highlight her mistakes. Yet, every time the student played, the music revealed skill and understanding far beyond what was visible on the surface. The teacher's attempts to control or humiliate were being quietly undermined by the student's dedication and natural talent. One day, during an intense practice session, the student felt completely immersed in the music. She closed her eyes and let her fingers move freely, guided by rhythm and feeling rather than conscious thought. The melody soared, full of emotion, and the room seemed to hold its breath. When she finally opened her eyes, she realized she had played flawlessly through the most difficult passage, something she had struggled with for weeks. Pride filled her chest, not for the teacher or the classmates, but for herself. She had faced a challenge, and she had met it with patience and effort. Word of her growing skill began to circulate quietly. Students who had once doubted her started seeking advice, asking how she had managed to master certain techniques. The quiet girl who had arrived timid and uncertain was slowly becoming someone others wanted to observe and learn from. The teacher, meanwhile, was forced to watch, recognizing a talent she had not anticipated. The plan to humiliate was unraveling, replaced by an uncomfortable truth. The student was far more capable than she had imagined. The tension between teacher and student became more complex. The teacher continued to push, assigning even more difficult pieces. Yet she had to admit, silently, that the girl's persistence and skill were impressive. The student, meanwhile, felt the weight of expectation but refused to let it deter her. Each day became a test, not of whether she could fail, but of how much she could grow. The music became her shield, her expression, and her voice. With every note, she proved to herself that determination and practice could overcome doubt and criticism. One afternoon, during a private session, the student played a piece she had been struggling with for days. The teacher listened silently, expecting mistakes, expecting hesitation. But the student played with grace, precision, and deep emotion. The room was silent except for the music, and when the final note resonated, the teacher found herself momentarily speechless. She had tried to see failure, and instead, she witnessed mastery and heart. The student looked up, calm and humble, unaware of the teacher's astonishment, focused only on the joy of having played the piece perfectly. The other students began to feel the shift as well. Observing the quiet determination, the late hours of practice, and the growing confidence, they started to reassess their own expectations. The whispers of doubt that had once surrounded the student began to turn into quiet admiration. Even the students who had been skeptical could not deny the skill and emotion now evident in her playing. Music had become her language, speaking louder than any words or judgments. Through it all, the student remained modest. She did not boast, did not seek attention, and did not compare herself to anyone else. Each practice, each performance, was a personal journey, a dialogue with the music that was entirely her own. She felt a sense of calm control, a growing understanding that effort and dedication could turn even the most challenging pieces into expressions of beauty. The pressure from the teacher and the expectations from classmates became background noise, no longer defining her abilities or her love for music. The teacher's scheme, meant to expose weakness, had the opposite effect. It revealed the student's resilience, her focus, and her growing mastery. Each attempt to create failure instead highlighted her dedication and innate talent. The irony of the situation was not lost on the teacher, who had underestimated the quiet girl who had once seemed so fragile and unsure. The student's determination was quiet but unyielding, and it was changing the way everyone in the room viewed her. As the first recital approached, the student continued her diligent practice. Each day, she honed her pieces, refining every measure, perfecting every nuance. She felt a quiet anticipation, not fear, and prepared herself to share her music with an audience that had not yet fully realized what she could do. The teacher's plan to humiliate her was still in place, but the student had grown stronger and more confident than ever. She knew that her music, her effort, and her passion could speak for her, regardless of any schemes or doubts. And in this time, as the days passed and the pieces grew more complex, the student's talent continued to blossom. What had begun as a quiet, nervous effort had transformed into a display of determination, skill, and heart. The music room, once filled with whispered doubts and anticipation of failure, now contained a growing sense of wonder. The student's journey was far from over, but she had already begun to turn the teacher's plan on its head. The very challenge that was meant to humiliate her was instead preparing her for a moment that would leave everyone amazed, including the teacher who had underestimated her. The day of rehearsal arrived, and the music room was buzzing with nervous energy. Students shuffled their sheet music, adjusting their instruments, and practicing small pieces before the main rehearsal began. The quiet girl entered the room, her bag slung over her shoulder, carrying only the essentials for her practice. She felt a flutter of nerves in her stomach, but it was accompanied by a calm determination she had developed over weeks of preparation. Today was the moment she would face not just her teacher's scrutiny, but also the watchful eyes of her peers. The teacher stood near the front of the room, clipboard in hand, eyes scanning the students. She had spent days planning how to expose the girls' supposed weaknesses. Every subtle remark, every challenging assignment, was designed to bring her public humiliation. The other students whispered quietly, glancing at the girl with a mix of curiosity and expectation. They had heard rumors about the teacher's plans and were eager to see whether the quiet student could handle the pressure. The atmosphere was thick with anticipation, a blend of tension and excitement. The rehearsal began, and one by one, students performed their pieces. Some played with confidence, others faltered slightly, and each performance drew attention from the teacher. The girl waited patiently, listening to the other students and taking deep breaths. She had practiced this piece countless times, memorizing every note, every rhythm, and every nuance. She reminded herself that the music was hers, a personal expression that no one could take away, regardless of judgment or expectation. When it was finally her turn, she walked to the piano with quiet confidence. The room seemed to hush as she sat down on the bench. Her fingers hovered over the keys for a brief moment, and then she began. The first notes were tentative, cautious, as she adjusted to the acoustics of the room and the pressure of the moment. The teacher leaned slightly, expecting hesitation, a slip, or a mistake. A few students exchanged quiet smiles, convinced that the girl would stumble. But then something remarkable happened. As her fingers moved across the keys, the music began to flow naturally, guided by months of practice and a deep connection to the melody. The tentative notes became confident and expressive, each phrase shaped with care and emotion. The room, once filled with whispers and anticipation, became silent. Every eye followed the movement of her hands, every ear tuned to the clarity and beauty of the music. The teacher's expression shifted from anticipation to disbelief. She had planned to expose weakness, yet here was undeniable talent unfolding before her eyes. The girl's fingers moved with precision and grace, translating her understanding of the music into a performance that captivated the room. Each passage, each delicate nuance, revealed a depth of skill and emotion that the teacher had not expected. The attempt to humiliate was failing, and the reality was becoming increasingly clear. The girl was extraordinary. The other students, initially waiting to witness failure, were now mesmerized. They leaned forward, silent, unable to look away from the music. Some felt admiration, others a quiet embarrassment for having doubted her. The quiet student who had seemed small and unsure was commanding attention through her performance alone. The beauty of the music, the confidence in her playing, and the emotion she conveyed were undeniable. She had transformed from a nervous, unassuming girl into the center of attention, not through arrogance, but through her dedication and talent. As she progressed through the piece, her confidence grew. Each section flowed seamlessly into the next, her fingers gliding over the keys with ease. The teacher's plan to highlight flaws was completely undermined. Instead, the piece highlighted her strengths. The contrast between expectation and reality was stark. The girl's quiet perseverance and patience had prepared her for this very moment, and she was proving herself in a way that no rehearsal or assignment could have fully predicted. When she reached the final notes, she allowed them to linger, letting the sound fill the room. For a moment, there was complete silence. Then, one by one, students began to clap, softly at first, then with growing enthusiasm. The teacher, momentarily stunned, found herself among the few who had not expected this outcome. Her attempt to orchestrate humiliation had been completely subverted. The girl had not only survived the challenge but had turned it into a display of talent and grace. After the rehearsal, the students approached her quietly, offering compliments and expressing surprise at her skill. Some asked for tips on technique, others simply wanted to acknowledge the beauty of what they had just heard. The quiet girl accepted their praise with humility, smiling softly, but internally she felt a quiet pride. She had faced a challenge, endured scrutiny, and remained focused on her love for music. The recognition from her peers was meaningful, but it was the personal triumph that mattered most. The teacher, meanwhile, retreated to the corner of the room, observing silently. Her plan had failed, and she had to acknowledge, however begrudgingly, that she had underestimated the student. There was no humiliation here, only skill, dedication, and the power of quiet determination. The teacher made a mental note to reconsider her approach, realizing that talent and perseverance could not be forced into failure by manipulation. In the days following the rehearsal, the girl continued her practice with renewed confidence. She had experienced firsthand how her preparation, patience, and focus could overcome expectation and doubt. The music room, once a place of tension and anticipation, had become a space of quiet mastery, where her skills were recognized not through comparison but through the purity of her expression. She continued to work diligently, refining her pieces, exploring new techniques, and deepening her understanding of each composition. Her classmates now approached her with a mixture of respect and curiosity. They watched as she practiced, noting the care and precision with which she approached each piece. Some asked questions, eager to learn from her approach, while others simply observed quietly, absorbing the dedication she displayed. The quiet student had become a source of inspiration, not through boastful display, but through the undeniable quality of her work and the humility she maintained throughout. The teacher's role in this transformation was complex. She had intended to demonstrate weakness, but instead she had witnessed growth and talent emerge under pressure. The experience forced her to reconsider her assumptions, to recognize that determination and love for one's craft could triumph over expectation and doubt. The teacher's respect for the student grew, tempered by the awareness that her initial judgment had been flawed. What had been intended as a moment of humiliation had become an opportunity for growth, not only for the student but also for those observing. Through it all, the student remained focused on the music itself. She played not for approval, not for recognition, but for the joy and expression that music offered. Each practice session was a conversation with the instrument, a journey through emotion and technique. The challenges she faced, whether assigned by the teacher or arising from her own desire to improve, became stepping stones rather than obstacles. Her confidence grew, rooted in skill and effort rather than external validation. As the first recital drew closer, the student's preparation intensified. She reviewed each piece meticulously, exploring subtle variations and refining her interpretation. Her fingers moved effortlessly over the keys, guided by understanding and intuition. The music became more than a performance. It became an extension of her thoughts and feelings, a bridge between her inner world and the audience she would soon face. She understood that true mastery required not just technical skill but emotional connection, and she approached each piece with that awareness. The teacher, observing this progress, adjusted her expectations. The scheme to humiliate was no longer relevant. The student had proven that she could rise above challenge and scrutiny. The classroom, once a stage for judgment and anticipation of failure, had become a place of learning, growth, and unexpected admiration. The quiet girl who had entered timid and unsure had transformed through dedication and perseverance into a musician capable of astonishing those around her. In the quiet moments after rehearsal, the student reflected on her journey. She remembered the early days of uncertainty, the solitary practice sessions, the moments of doubt and fear. Each challenge, each critical remark, had pushed her to refine her skills and deepen her connection with the music. She realized that the journey was as important as the destination, and that her love for music was the driving force behind her progress. The recognition of others was gratifying, but the true reward was the growth she had achieved within herself. The stage for the recital loomed ahead, a space that would soon test her in ways rehearsal could only hint at. Yet she felt ready, armed with months of preparation, unwavering focus, and a profound understanding of the pieces she would perform. The challenge that had once seemed daunting was now a canvas for expression, and she was prepared to fill it with the music that had become an inseparable part of her life. She approached the upcoming performance not with fear, but with anticipation, eager to share her talent, dedication, and heart with an audience that had yet to witness her full potential. And in that readiness, she carried a quiet confidence born from persistence and effort. She had faced doubt, scrutiny, and expectation, and emerged not only unbroken but stronger and more capable. The music had been her guide, her teacher, and her companion, transforming nervous energy into skill and uncertainty into artistry. The first rehearsal had revealed her ability to rise above challenge, and the recital promised to show that she could do so on a stage that would leave everyone, even her teacher, astonished. The day of the recital arrived with a mix of excitement and nervous energy in the air. The auditorium was filled with parents, students, and teachers, each waiting for the performances to begin. The quiet girl arrived early, carrying only her sheet music and the confidence she had built over weeks of diligent practice. She could feel her heart beating fast, but there was a calm determination beneath the nerves. She had worked for this moment, prepared herself, and now it was time to let the music speak. The students before her performed with varying degrees of skill. Some played confidently and gracefully, while others faltered under the pressure. Each performance drew polite applause, yet she could feel the tension growing as her turn approached. Her teacher watched closely, poised to observe any sign of weakness, but the girl remained focused, her mind centered on the notes she had memorized and the emotion she wanted to convey. She reminded herself that she was not playing for approval, but to share the music she loved. When her turn arrived, the girl walked to the piano with quiet poise. The room seemed to hold its breath as she sat down and adjusted the bench. She took a deep breath, let her fingers rest lightly on the keys, and began. The first notes were clear and deliberate, setting the tone for the piece. Each phrase flowed naturally, guided by the countless hours of practice and the deep understanding she had cultivated. The music was no longer just notes on a page. It was a story she was telling, a feeling she was sharing with every listener. The teacher, standing at the side of the stage, expected hesitation or a small mistake, but none came. The student played with precision, yet there was a fluidity and grace that brought the piece to life. The audience, initially quiet with curiosity, began to lean forward, drawn in by the beauty of the performance. Every note carried emotion, every chord expressed depth, and the music seemed to fill the room in a way that was almost tangible. As the piece progressed, her confidence grew. She allowed herself to feel the music fully, letting the emotion guide her fingers. The difficult passages she had once feared now became opportunities to showcase her skill. Her hands moved with both strength and delicacy, balancing technical accuracy with expressive phrasing. The audience was captivated, watching silently, as the quiet, unassuming student transformed into a musician commanding the stage. The teacher's initial plan to humiliate her had completely backfired. Instead of faltering, the student's performance revealed mastery and artistry. Every challenge the teacher had imposed, every expectation of failure, had been met with quiet resilience and determination. The irony was clear. The very scheme intended to highlight weakness had instead showcased talent. The teacher found herself quietly astonished, unable to deny the skill unfolding before her eyes. The audience remained entranced, sensing the depth of preparation and emotion in the performance. The girl's fingers danced across the keys, each note precise yet filled with feeling. She had learned to connect with the music in a way that went beyond technique. She understood the story behind the composition, and her playing communicated it fully. The room, once filled with whispers and anticipation, was now united in silent admiration. As she reached the climax of the piece, the intensity of her playing grew, yet she maintained control and poise. Every chord resonated with clarity, every passage was executed flawlessly. The audience could feel the dedication, the countless hours of practice, and the emotional journey that had brought her to this moment. Her classmates watched in awe, realizing that the quiet girl they had underestimated was capable of astonishing skill. Even those who had doubted her now felt admiration and respect. When the final notes echoed through the auditorium, she held the last chord, letting it resonate fully before slowly lifting her hands from the keys. The silence that followed was brief but profound, a moment of collective recognition of the talent and effort they had just witnessed. Then, The applause began, soft at first, and then growing into a wave of appreciation. People stood, clapping enthusiastically, some with tears in their eyes, moved by the performance. The girl smiled modestly, feeling a deep sense of fulfillment and quiet pride. Her classmates approached her after the performance, expressing their astonishment and admiration. Some asked about her technique, eager to learn, while others simply wanted to acknowledge the beauty of her music. The girl accepted their praise with humility, grateful for their recognition but focused more on the joy of having shared her music successfully. She had faced scrutiny, expectation, and doubt, and emerged not only successful but stronger and more confident. The teacher, meanwhile, quietly reflected on the outcome. Her scheme to humiliate had been completely undone by the student's perseverance and talent. She had hoped to expose weakness but instead had witnessed growth, skill, and emotional depth. The realization was both humbling and enlightening. The teacher recognized that her initial judgment had been flawed, and that true talent often emerged in the face of challenge and pressure. The experience would change the way she viewed her students in the future. In the days following the recital, the quiet girl continued her practice, not for attention or praise, but for the love of music itself. Each note, each piece, became a personal journey, a way to explore her own abilities and express her emotions. The recognition she had received was gratifying, but it was secondary to the satisfaction of having faced a challenge and met it with dedication and skill. Her growth was internal as much as external, a transformation that strengthened her confidence and deepened her connection to the music she loved. Her classmates and other students began to approach her with respect and curiosity, observing her practice and seeking guidance. The once quiet and underestimated student had become an example of dedication, talent, and humility. The teacher's initial plan had failed, yet it had inadvertently allowed the girl to demonstrate her potential fully. The experience had highlighted not just skill, but character, perseverance, and the quiet strength of determination. The recital had also changed the atmosphere at the school. The room that had once been filled with whispers of doubt and expectation of failure was now a place of inspiration and admiration. The girl's journey had shown that talent, when nurtured with dedication and passion, could overcome doubt and scrutiny. Her story spread quietly among students and teachers alike, serving as a reminder that perseverance and love for one's craft were often more powerful than external judgment. As she reflected on the recital, the girl felt a deep sense of accomplishment. She remembered the long hours of practice, the moments of doubt, and the quiet victories that had led her to this point. She understood that the recognition from others was temporary, but the skills, confidence, and emotional growth she had gained were lasting. Music had become more than a skill. It was a companion, a teacher, and a voice that allowed her to express herself fully. The teacher, observing the change in the girl and the respect she had earned from her peers, quietly adjusted her own perspective. She realized that attempting to humiliate someone could never suppress genuine talent and dedication. Instead, challenges and scrutiny could become opportunities for growth and discovery. The student's performance had not only amazed everyone present, but had also taught an important lesson about perseverance, humility, and the power of quiet determination. In the days and weeks that followed, the girl continued to practice, explore new pieces, and refine her techniques. Each session was an opportunity to deepen her understanding and strengthen her skills. The recital had been a milestone, a moment of triumph, but it was not the end of her journey. She remained focused, humble, and dedicated, knowing that true mastery was a lifelong pursuit. The experience had prepared her for future challenges, instilling confidence, resilience, and a deeper connection to the music she loved. And so, the recital became a turning point, not just for the audience who had witnessed her performance, but for the girl herself. She had faced expectation, scrutiny, and doubt, and had emerged stronger, more skilled, and more confident. The music had carried her through, guiding her fingers, her heart, and her mind. The applause, admiration, and astonishment were meaningful, but the true triumph lay in the quiet knowledge that she had remained true to herself and her passion, transforming challenge into a moment of brilliance that would inspire others for years to come. After the recital, life at the music school began to feel different for the quiet girl. The applause and admiration from the audience had left an imprint, not just on the people who watched, but on herself. She felt a new sense of confidence, though she carried it with the same humility as always. She knew that this recognition was a moment in time, and that real growth came from the quiet work she continued to do every day. Her teacher, who had once schemed to humiliate her, now watched with a mix of respect and reflection. She had underestimated the student's determination and skill, and it had been made clear during the recital. The teacher realized that her attempts to create failure had unintentionally allowed the girl to shine, showing everyone that perseverance, focus, and passion could surpass expectation. Though it was difficult for her pride, the teacher quietly acknowledged that she had learned something valuable about judging others too quickly. The other students, too, began to see her differently. The quiet girl who had once been overlooked or underestimated had become a symbol of determination and talent. They admired the dedication it had taken for her to reach this point. Some approached her for advice on technique, asking questions about her practice routine, or seeking her thoughts on how to interpret difficult pieces. The girl shared what she could, always with kindness and humility, never letting the praise make her arrogant. She focused on helping others understand that growth was a journey, not a sudden achievement. Her own life, however, remained centered on the music itself. The performance had been important, yes, but the real satisfaction came from the practice, the repetition, the quiet exploration of each note and phrase. She continued to arrive early to the practice rooms, to play in solitude, and to challenge herself with pieces that pushed her skill and understanding further. Each day was an opportunity to improve, to refine technique, and to express herself more fully through music. Even as she gained recognition, she never sought it out. She played because it brought her joy, because it allowed her to communicate emotions that words could not capture. Music had become a companion and a teacher, offering lessons in patience, resilience, and focus. Each new piece was a challenge and a gift, a way to continue growing and exploring. The quiet girl had learned to find satisfaction not in the applause, but in the steady progress she made through diligence and passion. Her classmates often noticed the subtle difference in her demeanor. She was calm, centered, and confident, but never boastful. She carried herself with a quiet assurance that inspired those around her. Others began to understand that true talent was not always visible at first glance, and that perseverance often revealed abilities that were hidden from immediate view. She became a silent example of what could be achieved when one focused on their craft with dedication and humility. The teacher, though initially frustrated by the failure of her scheme, began to adjust her approach with all her students. She realized that pushing someone to fail could not reveal talent. It could only test patience and resilience. She learned that encouragement, even in small measures, combined with challenges that respected students' abilities, could inspire growth rather than fear. The quiet girl had inadvertently taught the teacher a lesson about mentorship and the dangers of underestimating potential. Word of her talent and perseverance began to spread beyond the school. Some local musicians and teachers heard about the recital, intrigued by the story of the quiet student who had amazed everyone with her skill. They praised her dedication and encouraged her to continue performing, yet she remained grounded. She was interested in progress, in deepening her understanding, and in sharing her music, not in fame or recognition. She had learned that true satisfaction came from effort and mastery, not external validation. As the days and weeks passed, the quiet girl continued to explore music with curiosity and care. She tackled more complex pieces, experimented with interpretations, and learned to convey emotion and narrative through her playing. The music room, once a space of nervous anticipation, had become a place of growth, reflection, and joy. She played not to prove herself to anyone, but to express her love for the art, to connect with the music and through it, to connect with others. She also began to notice how her perseverance influenced her classmates. Some who had been doubtful or competitive started to approach their own practice with renewed focus. Her example showed them that quiet dedication could lead to remarkable results. The music room's atmosphere shifted subtly, from comparison and expectation to collaboration and mutual encouragement. The quiet student, without even trying, had become a source of inspiration. Even the teacher, who had once attempted to orchestrate humiliation, began to see the value of patience and encouragement. She started to approach her lessons differently, offering challenges that were ambitious yet fair, praising effort as much as results, and understanding that growth required time, support, and guidance. The experience with the quiet girl reshaped the teacher's perspective on how talent should be nurtured rather than judged prematurely. Over time, the quiet girl participated in more performances, each one showcasing her skill, discipline, and emotional depth. Each recital was a chance not just to perform, but to experience music in a fuller, richer way. She developed a reputation for integrity and focus, as well as for the ability to bring emotion and nuance to each performance. Yet she remained humble, always remembering the long hours of practice, the mistakes she had corrected, and the small victories that had built her skill. Her journey had become a story of quiet triumph. The obstacles she faced, the doubts of others, and the pressure of expectation had all shaped her, but had never defined her. She had learned to rely on her own dedication, to trust in her preparation, and to find satisfaction in effort and growth rather than immediate recognition. Music had been both her challenge and her reward, a constant companion that guided her through self-discovery and achievement. As she looked back on the path that had led her to this point, she recognized that the initial attempts to undermine her had only strengthened her resolve. The teacher's scheme, meant to humiliate, had inadvertently given her an opportunity to rise to the challenge and reveal her true ability. Each difficulty had taught patience, focus, and the value of preparation. She had transformed not because others had acknowledged her talent, but because she had nurtured it herself, quietly and persistently. The quiet girl's story became an inspiration for others, showing that perseverance, humility, and passion could overcome doubt and expectation. She had demonstrated that true growth came from dedication, patience, and love for one's craft. The recital, the teacher's initial scheme, and the recognition that followed were all part of a journey that had revealed not just skill, but character. Her talent had amazed everyone, but it was her perseverance, focus, and heart that left a lasting impression. In the end, the quiet girl continued to play, practice, and learn, always seeking new challenges and ways to express herself through music. She carried the lessons of her journey with her, that determination and passion could transform obstacles into opportunities, that humility and focus could lead to true mastery, and that the love of one's craft was more rewarding than any applause. Her story was one of triumph, not just in performance, but in the development of character, resilience, and enduring dedication to the art she cherished. And so, the girl who had once been quiet and overlooked became someone everyone remembered, not just for the music she played, but for the journey she had undertaken, the perseverance she had shown, and the heart she had poured into every note. The teacher's plan had backfired, yes, but it had revealed something far more remarkable. The quiet girl's talent, strength, and the unshakable spirit that would carry her far beyond any single recital or moment of recognition.